So I spent my whole childhood believing that I didn't really like reading because I had only ever been introduced to the books that I was told to read and never to the books that I felt like I wanted to read. So I found it very uninteresting and boring. Still, even so, I really liked going into bookshops and looking at all of the books that they had. So one day when I was 14 years old, I went into a bookstore and I decided to buy a book that I thought was interesting, and to my surprise, and fortunately, it was also very cheap, so I was able to buy it with my own money. And that was basically a one-way ticket for me to discover the amazing world of young adult fantasy books at the age of 14, and I could easily spend 1 week reading 3 different books from my phone. So that is until I stopped, and now I am picking it back up again. Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, which you probably are, my name is Sabrina. I'm a human based in Argentina, and in this channel I'm going to be talking about things that are of interest to me, like productivity, maybe personal finance, and self-discovery, because I believe we should all discover ourselves a little bit every day. In this video, I'm going to be talking about a little bit about how I fell in love with reading when I was a teenager, how I stopped for some time in my life, and then how I am picking it back up again. So let's get right into it. So ever since I was little and I had no money of my own, I used to love going into bookshops and just taking a look at all of the books that they had on the shelves. I didn't really like reading. I liked the idea of reading, but I wasn't an active reader because I had only ever been introduced to school books, and some Paulo Coelho books that my sister used to have. And Paulo Coelho was not really my style of reading as a child. So whenever we used to go to the mall with my family and I used to ask them to go into the bookshop, there were 2 options. Either we would go in, but they wouldn't buy me anything because they said that I wouldn't read it even if they did buy it for me. Or I wouldn't ask them to buy me anything because I believed that I wouldn't read it even if they did buy it for me. Or we just wouldn't go in at all. But still, I really loved going to the bookshops. So one day when I was old enough to have my own money, I went into the bookstore and I started going through all of the books there. And I picked up this hardcover book that seemed really interesting for me. And I'm not the type of person that just picks up a book by the cover and just buys it just because. I need to actually know that I am going to be interested in what I'm reading. So I opened it up and I read the first few pages, and every chapter had these sort of short story or poem at the beginning of the chapter, and that was enough for me to be interested by the book. And it was a hardcover book, and lucky enough for me, it was also rather cheap. So it was like everything was aligned for me to be able to buy that book. It had interesting short stories or poems at the beginning of each chapter. It was cheap and it was a nice hardcover book, so why not buy it? If I am remembering correctly, this was rather close to my birthday because when I was reading this book, I was reading it while also listening to Pink's The Truth About Love album and John Mayer's Born and Raised album. And those were the 2 CDs that I had gotten as a birthday present that year. And unintentionally, that was a way for me to make reading more interesting because I had always loved listening to music, and like reading that book while also listening to those 2 CDs was like the perfect incentive for making reading more pleasurable for me, even if I didn't know it at the time. But honestly, that book was so good that I swallowed the entire thing in less than a week, and I then moved on to recommending that book to my best friend Isabella because she also loves reading and she also ended up loving the book. So now whenever I meet someone who loves reading just as much or maybe even more than I do, I recommend them that book because that book is the single biggest reason that I discovered my love of reading, and it's just incredible. I haven't reread the book, but it's definitely on my to-do list because I found it so interesting the first time that I read it that I even bookmarked some of the pages because they had interesting passages. And honestly, I am completely sure, when I read it I was like 14, I am completely sure that there are some things that I maybe didn't understand back then that are going to have a different impact in my life right now that I am 24, almost 25. So I really, really want to read it again. And then after that, that same friend that I lent the book to went on to lending me The Perks of Being a Wallflower and Looking for Alaska. And those 2 books, I also read those 2 books in less than a week each, and I loved them so much. And they were what introduced me to reading books in English, because the first book I read it in Spanish, and then I started reading these 2 books in English. And the way that my vocabulary grew when reading these books was amazing, and it opened up a new door for me as well, to reading books in their original language, or if they're not in their original language, to reading them in English, because it just improves my vocabulary and my grammar. And when it comes to the emotional impact that a book has on you, no book has ever been able to make me cry the same way that Looking for Alaska made me cry. I am talking full-on ugly crying, sobbing, having a panic attack alongside the characters in each page of the book, because the way that John Green described the feelings of those characters, the book is divided between like 2 parts of the story, a before and an after. It was the first time that I had ever read a book in that format, so it's kind of like a countdown for the days before and a count after the days. So it's just like the way that he described the emotions of those characters in the middle of the book, no book has ever made me cry the same way that Looking for Alaska made me cry. So I went on to buying, like, every time that I used to travel with my family abroad, I would buy a lot of books in English, and which that was a nightmare, because imagine going back with a suitcase full of books. But I was very stubborn. I have always been very stubborn, and the things that I want to take with me, I just take with me. So I went on to buying a bunch of books in English every time that I could. So what changed? What happened? Why did I stop reading? To be honest, I am not entirely sure. To an extent, I suppose that it's simply life. As you grow up, you start having less time for the things that you want to do, and you are occupied with the things that you have to do. I graduated high school and I went on to start university, and at the same time that I started university, I also started working as an English teacher, so I had less and less time for the things I wanted to do. And also, sorry about that. Also, the books that I liked reading were not very popular in my hometown. I'm originally from Venezuela, so there were no books in English in the bookshops, and there was no young adult fantasy novels or anything that was remotely interesting for me in that moment. So I couldn't really find the books that I liked in the bookshops. I had to travel to visit my family abroad in order to be able to buy the books, and then doing that even became really, really expensive. So I just naturally stopped reading. That was until very recently. You see, when I was in the prime of my reading hype, I started reading the Vampire Academy books by Richelle Mead. The movie had just come out, and I kind of liked the movie and the actors in the movie, so I decided to also read the books, and boy, was I in for a treat. The books are nothing like the movie. The movie was made into a pseudo-comedy, and the books couldn't be farther from that. So, you know, like, my idea, I've always just enjoyed things, but I could really feel the book is definitely better than the movie thing in that moment, because the books were nothing like the movie. And I'm very happy that they're actually getting a TV show right now, like 8 years after the movie came out, something like that. They are getting a TV series, and I am actually very, very happy about that. I'm going to be watching those. Anyways, I digress. I really, really liked those books, and I saw them at a bookshop at the beginning of this year. And those books are very, very difficult to find here in Argentina. So, this is a bookshop that sells books specifically in English. And so, of course, I mean, I had no choice but to buy them. These are 6 books, okay? And these books have a spin-off series that is also 6 books. And I was reading the spin-off series as it was coming out, and I actually had like 2 or 3 of these books before, and then some of my friends recently traveled to the States, and I asked them to bring me like one of the other books. And then recently, like more recently, I also bought like the rest of the spin-off series. So I have like all of the books from the Vampire Academy universe. I have all 12 books, and I love the spin-off series so much that I have them all in hardcover. Like, it would be unacceptable for me to have these books in anything other than hardcover. And I actually, like, I got pissed a little bit because the format of these books, especially like the latest ones, which are bigger, when you open them, these paperback versions, when you open them and you fold, like, you bend them like this part that I don't remember how you call it, this part of the book, like, it got wrinkled and it has some marks now, which I don't like. And I take care of my books a lot, so that bothers me a little bit. But I, of course, love all of these books. And so when I bought these books again at the beginning of the year, I had no choice but to start reading them again. I have already read all of these 12 books, but these are some of the only books that I have read twice, and so fast. Like, I've read the last 4 books of the spin-off series twice already, and I just bought book 1 and 2 of the series, and I'm gonna reread them again, because every time I reread them, I fall in love with the series even more. And I read all of the Vampire Academy books at the beginning of the year, and I swallowed all of 6 books in about 2 weeks. I could not believe that I swallowed all of these 6 books in less than 2 weeks at the beginning of this year. And I didn't remember how much I loved these books. I really, really loved these books. So I am also not surprised that I am this dramatic when it comes to expressing myself, because man, do these books say some dramatic stuff. Of course, it's narrated from the point of view of a 17-year-old teenage girl, so of course it's going to be dramatic, right? But I really, really loved the way that these books are written, and the way that the feelings of the characters are expressed. So I discovered my book of reading again out of reading a very dramatic fantasy young adult series, and I just love having these books. I really, really love them. And I'm still a young adult because I'm 24 years old. So I'm a young adult. So that takes me to the second part of this video, which is the subsequent book haul that came after me realizing that not only do I still love reading, but I am actually an avid reader and I read very fast. So I'm going to start buying more books. So I started buying more books. So we are at the end. At the end of March, so this is not technically a book haul because I also bought these books also in February, but I'm going to be doing a pseudo March book haul for the books that I have to read and the books that I just bought last week.